Chapter 1: The Last Bus. The station was nearly empty, save for the dull flicker of fluorescent lights overhead and the steady drip of water from a leaky pipe in the corner. Ethan Reynolds glanced at his watch, 11:47 p.m. The bus should have been here by now. The schedule on the cracked, yellowing wall confirmed it: Route 13, last departure, 11:30 p.m. But there was no sign of it. The old man behind the ticket counter had noticed Ethan's growing impatience. He was hunched over, his leathery skin stretched taut across his cheekbones, his milky eyes fixed on Ethan with an unreadable expression. When Ethan asked about the delay, the man's answer had been strange, almost cryptic. "No buses run past midnight. And if one does, don't get on." Ethan chuckled at the time, dismissing it as just another urban legend. But now, standing alone in the dim, echoing station, the old man's words nagged at the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't quite pull free. Then, at exactly 12:01 a.m., headlights pierced the fog outside. The bus screeched to a stop, its tires hissing against the wet pavement. It wasn't like any bus Ethan had ever seen. The paint was faded, peeling in places, and the windows were dark, reflecting nothing but shadows. But it was late, and he was tired. Without thinking, he stepped aboard. The driver didn't greet him. In fact, he didn't even turn his head. His face remained shrouded beneath the brim of an old cap, his hands pale and bony as they gripped the wheel. Ethan paid his fare and moved down the aisle. The other passengers, if that's what they were, sat eerily still, their faces obscured by shadows. No one spoke. No one moved. As he settled into a seat near the back, Ethan felt it. A coldness, deep and unnatural, creeping into his bones. He tried to shake it off, but the sensation lingered, like the bus itself was exhaling some ancient, frigid breath. Then he noticed her. A girl, maybe 16, sitting across the aisle. She was the only one moving, her fingers nervously twisting a frayed ribbon in her lap. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, and her eyes, when they met his, were pitch black. Not dark, but empty, like staring into the void. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Ethan's heart skipped. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died on his tongue as the lights above flickered and went out. The bus lurched forward, and the darkness swallowed them whole. Chapter 2: The Passengers. When the lights sputtered back to life, Ethan immediately knew something was wrong. The bus wasn't the same. The seats were no longer just worn, they were decayed, the fabric sagging and torn, oozing dark stains that smelled faintly of rot. The windows were now fogged from the inside, streaked with something that looked disturbingly like claw marks. But it was the passengers that made Ethan's blood run cold. They were still in their seats, still facing forward, but they weren't alive. Their skin had turned ashen, stretched tight over skeletal frames. One man's jaw hung unnaturally low, his mouth gaping wide enough to reveal a hollow throat, as though something inside had been ripped out. A woman in the front row had no eyes, just dark, weeping holes where they once were. And the girl was gone. Ethan's breathing quickened. His mind screamed to get off the bus, but the landscape outside was no longer recognizable. The city had vanished, replaced by a dense, skeletal forest, its twisted branches clawing at the sky. The road itself seemed to wind endlessly, disappearing into the thick, unnatural fog that pressed against the windows like a living thing. Swallowing hard, Ethan stood, his legs shaky beneath him. Where are we?" His voice cracked in the silence. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from the front of the bus, the driver spoke. "Almost home." Ethan's stomach twisted. He tried to see the driver's face in the rearview mirror, but what he saw made his knees buckle. The reflection staring back at him wasn't human. Chapter 3: The Forgotten Town. The bus screeched to a halt, its tires grinding against gravel as the doors hissed open. Ethan was thrown forward, catching himself against the cracked armrest. His heart pounded as he peered outside. The bus had stopped in what looked like a small town, but it was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The buildings were old, crumbling, their wooden frames sagging as if exhausted from standing too long. Storefronts bore signs in a language he couldn't read, the letters jagged and unnatural. The streets were empty, save for flickering streetlights that buzzed weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. The fog was thicker here, almost tangible, curling around the buildings like fingers. The passengers began to stir. Slowly, they rose from their seats, their movements stiff and unnatural. Their heads turned in perfect unison, their lifeless eyes fixing on Ethan. "Time to go," they whispered in a hollow chorus. Ethan stumbled back, but before he could move, the girl appeared again. She grabbed his arm, her grip ice cold and impossibly strong. "You have to run," she hissed. "Before it sees you." Before he could ask what it was, the passengers began to file out of the bus, their footsteps echoing unnaturally in the empty streets. Ethan didn't wait to find out what would happen next. He bolted. Chapter 4: The Thing Beneath. Ethan ran, his breath ragged, his heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped animal. But no matter how far he went, the town stretched endlessly before him, twisting and shifting with every turn. He would sprint down one street only to find himself back where he started, the bus looming in the distance like a ghost that refused to let him go. The girl caught up to him, her face pale with terror. "They're not people," she whispered. "They're the forgotten ones. They took the wrong path, and now they belong to it." Ethan's chest tightened. "What is it?" Before she could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, guttural rumble echoed through the town, growing louder, deeper, until it felt like the earth itself was groaning in pain. Then, they saw it. The passengers stood in the center of the street, their mouths stretched open in silent screams. The ground beneath them cracked, split wide like a wound, and from the darkness below, something rose. It was a mass of shadow and bone, its form shifting and writhing, as if it were made of countless bodies fused together. Eyes, too many eyes, glowed faintly within the darkness, unblinking and filled with an ancient, insatiable hunger. It reached for the passengers, pulling them down one by one. Their bodies twisted and contorted, merging with the thing until there was nothing left but screams fading into the abyss. The last to go was the driver. He did not scream. He only smiled. Chapter 5: The Road Back. The town trembled, its buildings groaning as if they too feared what lay beneath. The girl grabbed Ethan's wrist, her eyes wide with desperation. "You can still leave," she whispered urgently. "But only if you forget." "Forget what?" Ethan gasped, his voice hoarse. She pressed a cold hand to his forehead, and an icy chill seeped into his mind, numbing his thoughts, clouding his memories. "When you wake up," she said softly, "don't remember this place. Don't remember me." Darkness swallowed him whole. Ethan awoke with a start, sitting upright in an uncomfortable plastic chair. The harsh fluorescent lights of the bus station buzzed overhead, and the familiar, distant sound of city traffic filled the air. His head throbbed. His clothes were damp with sweat. Had it all been a dream? He glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. A bus pulled into the station, its headlights cutting through the night. The driver, a weary-looking old man, opened the doors and met Ethan's gaze with tired eyes. "You getting in, son?" Ethan hesitated, a strange, unexplainable fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. Something inside him screamed run, but he couldn't remember why. He turned away, deciding to wait for the next bus. As he walked out of the station, the reflection in the glass door caught his eye. For just a moment, he saw her, the girl from the bus, watching him from the other side. And behind her, it was still waiting.